Hi all, Rick here with a sort of canon vessel based on a viewer request. Let me explain. The Valiant class is a variation of the Defiant that never made it into service in the Prime timeline. So far. Or if it did, it was not on screen. However, it did appear as the original Master Systems display of the USS Defiant, owing to its real-world origin, which means that in some interpretation the class did exist as a potential for the original Defiant class. Of course, you can merely handwave away the use of the image as an error, but as usual, other official media outside of the shows has taken the concept and run with it, creating the Valiant class tactical escort. Among many designs that were created for the Defiant, Jim Martin's Valiant was the first to evoke the ultimate shape of the vessel. You can clearly see the eventual selection in the topography of the ship. It was a little more aggressive looking with forward angled nacelles, similar to Romulan or Klingon designs, which was more indicative of combat. While on the right path, it was deemed to not be tough or bulky looking enough, and it needed to be beefed up a little more, ultimately becoming the stepping stone in the conceptual process. The name was also changed from Valiant to Defiant to avoid conflating it with the USS Voyager. The origin of the Defiant class is pretty well documented in canon, with Captain Benjamin Sisko managing the construction yard that oversaw it and contributing heavily to its design. The vessel was envisioned as a response battleship for anti-Borg operations and notably overpowered for its small scale. I cannot imagine why Sisko would have it in for the Borg. Anyway, the Valiant was pitched as one of the original schematic designs for the eventual Defiant and named accordingly as the Valiant NCC 6089. Therefore, in canon, its development is identical to the Defiant's up to a point. From the mid-2368 to 2370, the Defiant project worked to create one of Starfleet's few combat-centric vessels at the Antares fleet yards, but ultimately, the familiar design we all know was selected to progress to the prototype stage, and the Valiant concept sidelined. Most of what the Defiant is was initially designed for the Valiant, from the pulled-in look of the entire vessel to the punchy forwards-facing weapons and internal utilitarian layout. Of course, then the Defiant was further mothballed for a year anyway. After entering service for the Dominion War, one of its line was named the USS Valiant NCC 74210 and lost in 2374, which is where the canon ends. In 2376, a replacement was commissioned shortly thereafter of the same class. This lasted until the early 25th century, after which Starfleet endured the Mars shipyard incident, suspicion of a new unseen threat, and a callback of many exploratory initiatives while scaling up its defensive capabilities. From the timeline of Star Trek Online, we learn among new designs they revisited older ones, and the Valiant class emerged from a second look at the Defiant's development. From 2405 to 2409, the project was reincarnated with the USS Valiant NCC 60890 prototype being commissioned that year as a new tactical escort. The goal was to create a more generalised version of the Defiant, which had been commissioned specifically to counter Borg threats. The Defiant's success was predominantly down to the fact that anything made to counter the Borg turns out to be pretty universally effective. But the Valiant was the answer to simply creating a more generalised battleship. It was even more compact than the Defiant class, especially in the nacelle design, and we can see that its odd shape is the result of this. The jutting weapons points, because the shoulders and hull were pulled in, the additional impulse engines protruding at the rear instead of being built into a cohesive hull profile, and the flatter overall surface. It had a standard crew of 50 and could be operated by a bridge crew of 5, but had very little passenger capacity. In terms of its size, we don't have an official measure, but it appears to be slightly smaller than the Defiant, whose size also fluctuates on screen. So it's an estimated 120 metres long, but I am basing this on estimates of estimates. Either way, it's not large. Much like its cousin, the Valiant was armed from the start with pulse phaser cannons as its primary weapons, and it has two main batteries of these on the nacelles. These are designed to relentlessly overwhelm shielded targets with repeated blows. Alongside this are very small phaser arrays. No less potent, their smaller length merely reduces the amount of firing points. There were two on top, one in front of the bridge and one about 2/3 down. Then there was one on the underside at the fore and another two at the rear. However, we also see these strips dotted around the vessel that could be other phaser arrays, but if so, they are not utilised in game. We'll say 5 for now, but possibly 11 in total. When it came to torpedoes, there were 2 rapid launchers either side of the ship's nose, just behind these shoulder platforms, as the Defiant class had, and then these 2 tower points on the nacelles above the cannons. Without being fired in-game, they appear to be 4 more torpedo launcher points, with both front and rear-facing outlets, which would make sense as I could not locate any other backwards-facing torpedo launchers, and most starships have at least 1. They may also be additional pulse cannon points. By a standard loadout, the Valiant class contained quantum torpedoes. It also had a quantum warhead module, which was a specialised launcher that could fire a payload of up to 6 quantum torpedoes in a single barrage. This was overwhelmingly devastating to most things and located under the nose at the front of the vessel. In terms of warp, it was running a warp core that could reach 9.9 at its maximum, with shutdown after 12 hours, a standard core by the 25th century. Assuming its strong ties to the Defiant project, we can also assume that it was the same sort of condensed and advanced warp core that it ran, meaning that it had comparable power generation of a Galaxy-class starship. One design note is that the nacelles had a clearer line of sight to each other thanks to the crescent shape. It did, however, feature 4 impulse engines spread across numerous outlets for advanced manoeuvrability, so it could bring its punchy 4 weaponry to bear. It was also covered in vents and grills, suggesting it ran hot and needed plenty of plasma venting and attempts to dissipate heat. It likely featured similar armouring to the Defiant too, but I could not find any mention of the cloaking device save for the online version which could carry one. As a last note, the exact stats here may differ from the never-seen but more canon version, as 1 is the envisioned result from early concepts, and the stats here are drawn from a different timeline's ultimate production of that design, revisited after 40 years. It's not the first vessel we've seen that originated as a concept for a different class, and it's certainly not out of the realm of possibility that it eventually becomes solidified in the lore as an active class at some point. But honestly, I don't see a reason for it when we have the Defiant class doing the same job, and newer vessels like the Inquiry and Akira, which were taking the role of larger combat ships. So, that's the Valiant class escort. Venom Geek Media did a video covering this a few months back and had a different take on the class, which fits more in line with how it would exist in the Splinter timeline of the novels, based on a different geopolitical need, and that's an interesting watch. So, until the next video, thanks for watching. I've been Rick, and I'll see you again for another lore video. Thanks again, and goodbye.